Hi, and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode number 88, and today we're going to re-review Lord of the Rings because that's the kind of a thing that we do. And I'm not going to do it alone. I'm going to do it with my co-reviewer of the set originally before it was released, with Trumpetman. So hello.
Hello. So today we're doing a review, and if we review the process, it's a review.
Exactly. That's a lot of re. But before we move on to that, I would like to thank my sponsors, mtjzone.com, and my patrons. And I have one new patron this week, so I'm going to welcome Matthew to the pack. And yeah, thank you very much for your patronage. All right, I think we can move straight into the topic because I'm not doing preambles when I have guests. So first of all, our set review has slightly different rules than most of the set reviews. It is because we're not giving our grades are not abstract. Our grades are predictive towards the game in hand win rate of the card in the future as the set is going to progress. So in order to do it, you can't do it just by guessing the game in hand win rate because some sets have slightly different game in hand win rates. So what we do in order to make it possible is we normalize all the results from the previous set. So basically, what I do is I take all the win rates, I take all the win rates of each set, and I make sure that the average win rate of each set will be 50%, and then I can compare them between them. So I can compare cards from Streets of New Capenna and Midnight Hunt because they were sort of adjusted for that difference in the win rate of general set. Literally, and based on that, we have grades, and those grades. So you can probably, if you know 17 lands results, you know that some cards will have like 70% game in hand win rate. Well, if you normalize them, because the players that are in 17 lands have a usually way higher than 50% win rate on average, this is going to go down because we move the center from 56 to 50%. So the 70 plus will move down to 60 plus. So the cards that we gave grade A plus are the cards that have this normalized win rate of over 60%. And example from the previous set was Sunfall. That card was extremely busted. When someone played white, you most of the time expected them to play it at some stage of the game. From this set, an example of a card that had an A plus grade, not by us, but by the actual results, is Orcish Bowmasters. It had 62% win rate in our normalized score.
And for A's, these are the 57 to 60% normalized data. So from March of the Machine, an example was Chrome Host Seed Shark. And then from this set, the only green-white card probably worth going for because it's an A, Arwen Mortal Queen.
Then we have A minuses. And these were the cards that after normalizations have a win rate of 55 to 57%. And in this grade, we sometimes do see commons. Not many of those appear there, but Printing Champion made the cut in the previous set. And in Lord of the Rings, none of the commons made it to the A minus grade. But we have Saruman's Trickery and Uncommon at this grade.
And then the B pluses, win rate 53.5 to 55%. So these really efficient threats. Example from Mom was Captive Weird, and from Lord of the Rings, Claim the Precious.
Then you have Bs, and these are like win rate of 52.5 to 53.5%. Voldaren Thrillseeker was an example from March of the Machine. And in Lord of the Rings, Frodo Baggins made that threshold. So we have another white-green card, just proving that white-green was the place to be in this format, isn't it?
Indeed. And then we have the B minuses is the 51.5 to 52.5% normalized win rates. These are the ones where it's like, if you first pick these cards, you're a little sad because you wish it was a little better, but they're still not bad. So Collective Nightmare from March of the Machine and Uruk-hai Berserker from Lord of the Rings.
Which was a bit surprising to me, actually. But okay.
It says tempt.
That's it.
Gotta be good.
The C pluses are cards that are, you're okay having them in the deck. You're probably very much not okay first picking them. Win rate between 50.5 and 51.5. And the example were Cosmic Hunger from March of the Machine or Quarrel's End from Lord of the Rings.
And then our C's, your bread and butter of limited. good cards, right? That's always the question of like, what is a C? Good cards for your deck, not replaceable yet, but again, just like basically any deck was going to want these cards. They're the 49-ish to 50-ish range cards. Aetherblade Agent from March of the Machine and Protector of Gondor in Lord of the Rings as examples.
Then we have C minuses. I'm not going to skip the fractions. Between 48 and 49.25%. And these numbers were adjusted by me for a reason I'm going to show you in a couple of slides. Examples, Skittering Surveyor from March of the Machine and File of Galadriel. And this set, just showing you how fixing is graded between those two sets. These are the cards that you probably are okay having a couple in your deck, but you don't want to be your deck full of those.
All right, and our D pluses, because Circovitz demands it, I'll read the full decimals. So 46.75 to 48% win rate. And so example, Negate from March of the Machine, and then Nasty End from Lord of the Rings.
And these between 45 and 46.75% win rate. We have Tenured Allcaster from March of the Machine and Fog on the Barrow Downs from LTR. These are the cards that you definitely don't want to have in your deck, but occasionally they will somehow find their way in there. And some of those cards, don't get me wrong, some of those cards might be good in a very, very niche deck, but they will not be good in your average deck.
And then the D minuses, truly heinously bad cards. Win rate 42 to 45% normalized, which means it's really bad. And so we have Icar's Shade from March of the Machine. And I think a card that I played exactly once in Lord of the Rings was Knights of Dol Amroth, the 4 mana 3/3 that can grow if you draw extra cards. Not really where you want to be.
And then we got the Fs, everything below 42%. Examples, Crystal Carapace from March of the Machine. And the most F of the Fs officially from the 2,500 cards we analyzed so far, the card with the lowest win rate, clocking a majestic 29% normalized win rate. The Ring Goes South, which is surprising because it's rarely that card this bad gets its large enough sample size to be accounted for in the data, because there are actually a couple of cards that probably were Fs, but they just didn't have enough sample size for the game in hand win rate to be displayed by 17 lands, like Hugh the Entwood, the all-time classic unplayable.
Win rate goes south. It was
Win rate goes south.
Was right there all along.
Who knew? So this is the distribution of our grades, so that you can get a nice idea of how they are distributed. And that's why we have some of those very weird fractions of percentage, because I wanted that graph to look as skewed as possible, so that I wanted to have very few A pluses and increasing numbers until we go to the C minus when it peaks, and then it starts dropping off, because I assume that you don't want too many Fs, you don't want too many Ds in this big kind of data set, because design is probably aiming that cards will be around that C minus D plus grade on average, because commons are most dominant group of cards. But if you see that we only have 12 A pluses from this shows all the cards from Midnight Hunt until Lord of the Rings. We could just get 12 A pluses in that time, and 2 of those were in the last set, so that's quite impressive. And like around 50 A's, 135 Bs, 250 C pluses, 274 C minuses, and then it starts dropping off to like 330 Ds and D pluses, and 200 Ds and 100 Fs. So the curve was determining those cutoff points ever so slightly, and that's why we have those weird fractions in our grades. And just to give you some characteristics of the set, in red you will see the percentage of each grade in all the sets that we analyzed, so since mid, and in blue you see the percentage of each grades in Lord of the Rings. And I think that the biggest difference between all the sets and Lord of the Rings had lots of really bad cards, or lower grades were overrepresented. So if you see at C minus, 15% of the cards in all the sets are C minuses, but in Lord of the Rings it was 18% of the cards, and like 13% of the card D pluses, but 15% in Lord of the Rings. And still you have some like small differences in Ds and D minuses, and we have quite a large difference. Only 4.6% of cards in all the sets are Fs, but in Lord of the Rings 7% of the cards were Fs. And I think that this was partially because of the color disproportion between Grixis colors and green and white. At the same time, we see that there are fewer A's, A minuses, and B's, and there is especially large differences between. There's like 10% of C pluses in all the sets, only 8% of C pluses in Lord of the Rings, and 13 or so percent C's in all the sets, and only 10% of C's in this set. So that's where the differences mainly lie. Fewer cards with higher grades based on our grading scale, more cards on the lower grade. Which resulted, I think, in slightly suboptimal draft experience in the way that you were forced to be in the good colors, and that limited your choices very often in the draft. And frequently, when you were pushed away from those colors, you ended up with a deck that was just, you knew that it's gonna go like 0-3 or 2-3 maximum.
Yeah, my hypothesis looking at this data is like if there are more like C's and C pluses relative to the average, I feel like my personal enjoyment of the set might be higher, only because there's just more good cards to kind of just mess around with and play around with in the draft. And so if that is true, which is just a hypothesis, I have no idea, then if that were true, and it could be a reason why personally I don't enjoy Lord of the Rings as much. You're saying you kind of have to really stick into your lane just to get playable decks, which definitely was true.
Yeah. I'm also seeing Squealer in chat complimenting our looks, which is always pleasant. And Underreal was 60 plus. Yes, it was 60 plus, if you asked. Okay, so let's go to our performance. So we evaluated all the cards before the set was released. And this is our performance in MUM. So how we did last time. We got like 45 cards fully correctly. So we didn't miss by a single grade. And 84, 82, 80-ish of them we had missed by 1 mark. And then we have a bunch of cards that we missed by multiple marks. Big difference why Neil was the better evaluator last time is that he had many more misses by 2 and I had many more misses by 3. And then it was more or less even across the board in terms of like those big misses when we missed by 7 grades or so. So how do you think it looks like in this set? Because you didn't see the data.
Well, first of all, I think we knocked it out of the park for our first one in March of the Machine, because that's pretty, like, there's not too many misses there, so that was pretty amazing, especially with how high powered the set was, and so that's kind of interesting. But I think I really missed pretty big on Lord of the Rings for a lot of stuff, because I probably gave the benefit of the doubt that all the colors were playable. And I think, green definitely wasn't. And for me, like, I think white kind of also wasn't in a lot of ways. So it's kind of it's going to be interesting to see.
I'm also like, even by looking at this graph, that so many more cards were having lower grades, and already last time we were overly optimistic about cards.
Well, I also backed off this time intentionally grading based on what we learned, but probably not enough.
But because we probably backed off to the baseline of all the sets, but this set is below the baseline, so it's a moving. You're moving the goalpost, Magic. How are we going to predict anything if that's the case?
Well, let's find out.
Yeah, we did slightly worse, although we did still get around 45 of the spot-on guesses, but not 80 misses by 1, but only 56. And then we have many more of those 2-3 grade misses. And also, they are like 50 range. And then like 27, 24 misses by 4. In the last set, we only had like 12, 22. So that's
we did better than I thought we were going to do based on my guess. So
it's not terrible, but we have like also 7 and 9 misses by 7 and 8. And last set, we only had like 3 and 2. So lots of those like really big misses.
But you props to you for getting 46 on the money versus my 41.
Oh yeah, that's a small victory. But I think that looking at this data, it's a clear draw between us in terms of
I agree.
evaluation of this set. It looks pretty much identical, even though our grades were anything but identical. It's just we miss in different places.
Yeah.
Right. So first, I'm going to start with cards that we atrociously missed, both of us. And by atrociously, I mean by 7 grades or more. And the first card is Legolas, the Master Archer. You gave it a B plus. I gave it a B. And what did it get from the set?
Probably D. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a D. I mean, it's not a bad card, and it could have been really good in some of the sets that we played before. It just suffered from being exactly what green doesn't want to do, I think.
Yeah, and I think like a 1/4 reach body in most sets is really good because it stabilizes, and in a set with ring tempting, it really doesn't. So, because once I get to level 3, it's not like it's blocking anyways.
No, it's not blocking anything. Did you ever play it?
I really only drafted green like 1 or 2 times, so no, I didn't.
Oh, I had some busted green decks, honestly, but it took a long format before that was possible.
The only time I drafted green was during the Arena Open because everyone knew what was up. So I was like, well, I guess I have to.
I guess I'm green.
It was fine.
I think I played it once, but I never did anything fancy with it. Oh well. Long list of the ants is the other of another of our atrocious misses. I think we went very optimistically that aggressive green would be good, and it was not. And that's it. I mean, if aggressive green is not good, if like red green aggro is not a viable archetype, this card is not going to be good. And I think that there were a handful of decks where this card could be good, but also then most of the time it needed to be drawn in your opening hand because the later in the game it was just an empty piece of cardboard, and I think that was the main suffering. You gave it B minus. I gave it a C+.
The card's just bad, but it's F. Yeah,
it's an F. It is an F. Next card, Mithril Coat, the equipment that has flash and it gives indestructible. Again, you gave it B minus. I gave it a C plus.
I actually this card was decent, I think, but definitely overrated. I don't know, like C minus.
According to the win rates, it's an F. It's a clear F. It was one of the lowest win rate cards. And yeah.
Okay, I don't think honestly I don't think this card was that bad, but
I still think it's not that bad, but the numbers are just atrocious, and I think that part of it was a selection of people that played it more frequently that had naturally a lower win rate. Because I mean, I think that good players would maybe pick it like pick 7 and maybe put it in their deck then, but didn't want to waste like pick 2, 3 for that card.
It's true. I never drafted the card because it was so highly picked. Yeah.
So I think that was the problem of the card. You had to draft it way too highly, and then also the players who were playing with it were the players with naturally lower win rate, which lowers the general grade maybe and does not reflect full power of the card, which probably was at like a D plus C minus, I guess. Okay, we have last one, I think. Fangorn, Tree Shepherd. We both gave it a C plus. What do you think it got?
Well, coming off the heel of March of the Machine, where all 7 drops were busted, I think we were a little bit, happy to give bigger grades to these. But back to reality.
It's not a tally, I can tell you that.
It's an F.
It is an F. Yeah, it is an F. Even though all the tree, actually that's weird because all the other tree folk were half decent for the weak power of green in this set. I mean, but all the other tree folks were okay. Okay, we move to the cards that you specifically missed by more than 7 grades, but I didn't. Although sometimes it was 6.
All right, so Torment of Gollum I gave a D. It ended up being, I think, one of my most drafted cards. Maybe I'll pull it up in between cards when you're talking just for fun. But Torment of Gollum was amazing. I love that card. So it was probably just a B.
It is, in fact, a B. So yeah, I guess when we had the original discussion, you were just not convinced that paying 1 extra mana for extra +1/+1 that will not always be a creature on its own, but sometimes will be just an enchantment would not be enough.
Yeah, or maybe I just didn't think like 2/2 mattered that much. Like, but 2/2 was like definitely a whole card, especially because things were smaller. So I think in certain sets, like maybe the 2/2 wouldn't be as good on Torment of Golem, but also just only it was the perfect environment for this card too, because it's like usually only like one or two cards in people's hands even mattered. So it was like just beautiful. Whereas like in really high power sets, I think this card would still be good, but like wouldn't be amazing.
Also played nicely around the Glorious Gale,
Mhm.
which is like perfect. Like you can play a couple of turns around the Gale, then you play Torment of Golem. If you care about it, you take it. If you don't care about it, take something else. It just like must have been so frustrating for people playing with Gale against Torment. Horn of the Mark, named after what it missed.
Horn of the Mark, the one where if you attack with two creatures or something. I
Yeah,
don't even know
that's
what it
it.
does because it
Or
was so
I
bad.
think that it's commonly known as no, not that one.
Yeah. F, right? Maybe D
It's
minus.
actually D
Yeah.
minus. It managed to pip into D minus. You gave it a B minus. I gave it a C plus. Therefore, I missed by only 6 grades, and I was absolutely not wrong about it. That's how it works. And then we have the last card that you missed by 7 grades, and I missed it by only 1
Watch in the water, yeah.
because you gave it a
Unplayable
C plus. I
card.
gave it a D minus. Yeah.
I thought maybe there was some like draw synergy stuff that could work, but I was higher on the 2/3 that looted, which that card was also really bad, and I like the combo of those, but yeah, this card didn't get there.
No, it was an F, in fact. But I think that this is the end of your atrocious misses. We have whole 3 of them, so that's not terrible. Now we go to a slightly longer list of my atrocious misses. Elrond, Master of Healing. I was high on that card because it looks pretty good. So I gave it an A minus because I thought that, look, even if blue-green archetype is not going to be like the most busted thing, but surely when you have the blue-green with Elrond, it's going to be super busted. Guess what? It was not.
Nope.
I gave it an A minus, you gave it a B, and it was a D plus, a majestic D plus. I missed it by whole 8 grades, as it were. So that was a bit sad.
That is really sad. The card
It
is
was
good, but not really. It didn't work out.
no. Lessons learned, I think, for me there. A plus B synergies. You need to have nerves of steel to hype them before the format starts. Then we have Friendly Rivalry. You gave it a C plus. I was much more bullish on it. I gave it a B, and it ended up as a D. I think that also this card is better than the grade suggests.
It's just green is the problem.
I
right?
think, especially green red.
Yeah.
It's just that if you miss by a whole archetype, even the good cards in that archetype are not going to save it. Although, I mean, as we saw, Frodo had a pretty good B grade, even though it's a green white card.
I played this card in red green before. The couple times I happened to draft that, and it was actually pretty good. My guess is maybe people were splashing this card, and that's when it gets pretty sketchy too.
Well, it would be actually a good thing to look through the data. Not that anyone cares about data from
anymore.
LTR,
Yeah.
but, yeah. That's the problem. When you have the most data, no one cares about it. Then I have Elven Chorus. You gave it a C. I gave it a B minus. And it turns out you were closer, but still not very close. Although some people swear by that card and they want to play a deck with it. I think that Simon Nielsen was very high on Elven Chorus in LTR draft, in pod draft. And I think that in pod draft, in pod draft, this card gains because the problem with in interpod draft, how is it called? Between
leagues, we just call it league draft, right?
Okay, leagues. Is that you very frequently play like very strong decks that were, like happen once every 6 pods, and you have to play against those. While in your pod, you play against whatever pool was opened in the particular pod. So the average quality of the deck is going to be much lower. You're going to be playing against. And cards like Elven Chorus are gaining much more power in there. I think that, some of those like weird build around cards or weird synergy cards are losing on the league structure of Arena. Long story short, it was a D minus. So another miss by 7 grades for me. Then we have Lost Isle Calling. I thought C plus was not a terrible grade for that card. You gave it a D plus, clearly knowing what's going on. Because what was going on? F. Oh, by the way, I think that this is a card I should probably read what it does because no one ever played it because it's on not only a rare but also an unplayable rare. But yeah, when you scry, you can put counters on it and you can exile it for 6 mana and draw a card for each counter on it. And if there were 7 or more, you take an extra turn. Yeah.
I had one opponent once cast this card against me, and it did literally nothing, and then I won easily.
It's not Fire Inscription
in
terms of enchantments that make you lose. No.
We make someone lose.
Oh, there we have the most spectacular example of the guesses, because we have Glamdring, which I missed by 7. I'd like to remind you. I gave it a B. You gave it a D. What was the grade?
D minus.
It was exactly D, which means that you had it spot on and I missed by 7, which makes it the card with the biggest delta between our guesses. Maybe not the card with the biggest delta, but the card that we were most polarly opposite wrong on those. So you were absolutely right. I was dead wrong. So yeah, congratulations on
thank you.
being able to.
Is that the Glamdring Award?
You win the Glamdring Award. Oh, that's it. Okay,
fantastic.
So we have it now for the next episode. We have the Glamdring Award. And that's, I think, my last big miss. Yeah. So we're going to go to our first of all those most of those misses, I think, that maybe except for Torment of Golem, where we were overly optimistic about a card
on the rares, right? For the most part.
Yeah, for the most part, it was rares. Yeah, so actually, Torment of Golem was the only common on the list. I think. I mean, we can go through. There was an uncommon,
and then
2
another uncommons,
and 2 uncommons, the rest of the rares, and Torment of Golem. I think that the trick with evaluating rares is that very often they do weird things that you never saw, and sometimes it looks like it's something that might work, especially when you didn't play with the set and you just fall into a trap of, well, maybe that's a B because it has powerful words on it. I mean, it probably does because it's a rare, but it doesn't mean that you'll be able to extract any of that power in the limited environment, I guess.
Definitely. And I do think it's pretty funny because we're talking about Torment of Golem, which I rated a D, and it's literally my most drafted card. I have the most copies of that. After that, for fun, I had Lorien Reveal, the blue card draw, and then Rally at the Hornbird, the red 1/1s. And I think that just speaks to that it was a Grixis format. So it's like we probably missed on giving higher grades to certain green and to a lesser extent white cards is my guess.
I guess. Oh, well, yeah. Okay. So by giving too high grades to the green and white cards. I agree. And but I think that, every set review, whatever you do it, I'm pretty sure that misses on the rares are going to be more spectacular because it's just like, it's easy to evaluate a 2-mana 2/2 with vigilance. You will miss by half a grade here and there, but it will, like on a very weird rare that has 5 conditions and maybe does something super busted, or maybe is a complete flop. It's really hard to get those. So I'm quite happy that we only missed in one direction in those really large grade misses, because that's something that you have to accept when you're doing set reviews, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
And I think we learned from last time because we gave overly ambitious grades for the most part, and I think we got, if we hadn't adjusted, because I know personally I was adjusting to make sure that like we really evaluate like, well, how is this really going to be, then we would have had even more huge misses where we were giving everything B's when they're really D's or whatever.
Yeah, no, I think that we did it, but actually let's take a look at it. So this is, I'm going to quickly describe, this is our performance in MUM, and I'm going to tell you this is the difference in grades, absolute. So basically, if you had an A and the card was A minus, you missed by 1. If you gave a card an A and it was an A plus, you also missed by 1. So our average misses in MUM was like, we missed by 2 on rares and mythics, on 2.3 on uncommons, and by 1.5, 1.6 on commons. So that's the absolute kind of miss, independent of the direction. So what do you think? How do we end up in this format?
I think we probably had something similar. My guess would be it would be maybe more like a flat line where maybe we missed more on rares and mythics and still some uncommons and way fewer commons.
Okay, of course, as a genius, I flipped the direction in my new graphs of the commons and uncommons and rares. But yeah, we missed much more on rares. It's 2.7 or 2.8 rather than 2 that we had. We missed more on uncommons. It was 2.5 rather than 2.3. Commons we missed by 2, and before we missed by 1 point. So across the board we missed by more. In the absolute terms. But this time, rares were the most dominant and not uncommons like in the previous set.
And I think this actually makes a lot of sense too, because if we think about rares being harder to evaluate and just going, you could easily go, be several marks off in either direction based on what you were saying. And if we look at March of the Machine, it was very rare dominated, but it was also uncommon dominated, because there was just a lot of really good uncommons and there was battles and all this kind of stuff. So we happened to miss a lot more relative, I would say, in that set with the uncommons compared to LTR, which is why I think we have more of like a linear line from commons to rares, whereas it was more kind of a mountainous peak, I would say, on March of the Machine, if you imagine the graphs.
Yeah. Okay, so the next slide will be how we missed, because this shows absolute, but obviously we miss once we overvalue, once we undervalue. So in order to see what was the direction of our misses, I also did a graph where I'm not adding them independent of the direction, but if you missed in one direction, it's going to be positive. If you missed in the other, it's going to be negative. So obviously those going to be much smaller. And what do you think? Like, is it going to stay
I think we definitely way overvalued because there was unplayable colors.
I'm pretty sure we overvalued on every, but it should decrease at least I would say, it should decrease by quite a lot in common.
But I don't know if you have it broken down by colors, maybe we were more spot on the appropriately valued ones.
That's coming. I did it by colors, but that's the first we got by rarity only. So in MUM, we missed on commons by 0.5, on rares and mythics by 0.801 roughly, and uncommons we missed by 1.3 or so, and it was in the direction of we overvalued cards, because these graphs are over, meaning overvalued. If they would be under 0, that means we undervalued some cards. So what do you think it's going to change?
I think it's going to be similar. I think we overvalued cards still. I think probably we did. Well, I think it's going to be across the board, but because I think I probably overvalued every single green card, even though they looked pretty bad. They were even worse than that. So I think it's just going to be a lot of misses everywhere.
So 0.7 for commons. Before that it was 0.5. So yes, slightly different. Around 1.6 with uncommons. That's still higher than in the previous set, and way overvalued rares by 2 grades on the average, while it was only 1 grade previously. So a whole grade extra overvaluation on the rares. And this has something to do with so many Fs in those rare slots in this set. So many unplayable rares.
Mm-hmm.
And also because 3 that we probably got really well did not have the game in hand win rate, so they are not in the analysis. Damn you.
Yeah. I mean, why I guess we kind of already talked about that a little bit as to the why and thinking about card evaluation. But missing by that much on the rares, do you think it's because the rares that are unplayable required a lot of setup and just weren't good for the most part? If we look at the Elrond, for example, or
I think
the Glamdring in some sets, maybe that type of card might be better. But I think that
some of those rares just looked like they might be playable, and we fell into those traps without knowing the color balance. It was easy to grade anything that was green you saw the list that we made of the big misses. It was like Legolas, it was like Elrond. Those things, we graded them higher because we thought green was much more playable than it was, even though we were not like super bullish on the quality of it. As you will see in the next slide, it was still, we thought it was, like a mid color and not like a much lagging behind color. And I think that that's where the most of the misses came. But also we got like some good rares that we undervalued, so that's not like forget about those. I think we're gonna see the cards that we undervalued because these are the most interesting one, I guess, in terms of analyzing what we did wrong. Okay, so this is our performance from Mum, where we basically undervalued blue and only slightly overvalued black, but we missed quite a lot on red, and multicolor cards are trickier to evaluate. And we were like one pick off on green and white. A very interesting part of that is that we definitely underappreciated how good blue was. So how do you think we are in terms of color evaluation in this set?
I think we're going to be over on white and green, under on blue, and probably pretty accurate on black and red, if I had to guess.
All right. So first of all, we are spot on red, which is super exciting that we managed to get like color so correct. Black, we slightly undervalued. And blue, there were some differences, but generally slightly overvalued. But the misses on green are just atrocious. Like we overvalued green cards by an average of 3 grades. So basically, that's giving it a B- instead of a C.
Yeah.
And on every single card, which is not that great. And massive.
Well, I mean, to be fair,
misses on
the entire
cards.
mechanics didn't. I mean, you got to kind of give some credit. You're like, well, it's saying we should do some food things, and then that just isn't true. So,
we can also, I mean, very easily, we can just tell that people just didn't know how to play green and it's their fault. I was winning with green decks all the time when I had 3 Frodos or something.
Yeah. Well, I avoided it like the plague. I find it interesting. I thought I was going to maybe say I undervalued blue originally because the cards themselves had pretty flat power level, but cohesively were quite good. But I ended up drafting a ton of blue, and it's interesting that I overvalued it even initially. But I think I tended to draft towards blue the whole set because I like how you could kind of go almost any direction. Whereas a lot of the other decks, it's like it was hard to pivot in and out of them.
I'm pretty sure that we had there are some cards in blue that were just very easy misses, like Deceive the Messenger, or maybe you overvalued them.
That's what I was saying. That would be an undervalue, right?
Yeah. But you definitely
maybe like Isolation at Orthonk or something.
Or Luther,
where it's like
it
looks pretty decent, and then maybe I was too high on it.
Yeah, white also like not really impressive. And when we look at this compared to the previous numbers, the scale of the miss on the green that we made in this set was just impressive. But on the other hand, like I'm really happy with the Grixis color evaluation in generally. Especially me.
Yeah, you did really well on that.
Very important. Okay, so I think that a sort of last part, and I think that we can take a longer discussion about individual cards because missing on a card that was an F is absolutely inconsequential because you learn the card that a card is an F very quickly. I think that the more interesting misses in evaluation are when you give an F to a card that is actually a C plus, than to giving a C plus to a card that is in the end an F. So I did a slide with all our biggest misses in that direction. Mainly looking at looking at the cards that had a miss of 3 grades or more by each one of us in the direction of undervaluing them. And here is your list, and obviously it's starting with the Torment of Gollum, which you missed by 7 grades. But then walk me through the cards and why do you think you might have made those misses?
All right, so next up we see at -4 Horn of Gondor. So I just really underrated that, and I think reading the card, I think there are some environments where that card's amazing. And if it's like a super fast format, you might not have the time to use the horn. And I was sort of looking at, well, we have ring temp, so maybe it's really aggressive or something, so it's not that good. And also like there's ways to just sweep up all the tokens. So I thought, oh, maybe it's not that good. Obviously, a card ended up being busted. It's funny that I kind of could think that, and then my next card I also underrated was Rally the Hornburg. So if I think the set's going to be really aggressive, but I think I just didn't really expect like 2/1/1 haste to be that good. So I just thought the card wasn't as powerful as it was. And 1/1s have been the best they ever were. And I think just again and again, multiple bodies for a single card is always better than it looks. Then Horses of the Bruin I underrated that card. And I think probably part of it's ring tempting, maybe looking clunky, but in just being a good card. Quarrel's End also a card I really turned around on, but I think it just had a cross section of a bunch of synergies, and it being a spell mattered a lot more than it maybe would in most sets. Although I think if I look at some of these cards in general, I fell into the pretty classic trap where if it's a spell that gives a creature and has an effect, for some reason the brain tricks me into thinking that's somehow worse than if a creature comes in and has entered the battlefield when they're literally the same functionally.
Well, not when there's bounce.
Yeah, but functionally the same, right?
Mm.
Like if I look Torment of Golem, I underrated. Quarrel's End, I underrated. Saruman's Trickery, underrated. Rally, which gives multiple creatures tokens. Amber, the Rittermark. So like it's kind of interesting looking at the types of cards I personally am underrating, but I'm sure other people might fall into that trap too. So
I mean,
something to just be
Orcish
aware of.
Bowmasters you underrated. That's also a spell that
It
brings
also
another
comes
creature.
with a one. Yeah, only -3. I mean, I knew that card was good. It's just I didn't know how good.
No,
I
of
think
course.
I gave it a B plus.
We're talking about A plus. Yeah. We're talking about A plus. No, I'm just making fun of that being a spell that brings another creature.
It is
into
funny
play.
because I also Andrul gives tokens. War Beast of Gograth dies into tokens. So almost every single card on the
Elmer
list.
makes tokens.
Yeah. So it's pretty funny. And I think also I underrated Tempt. I think I knew Tempt would be good, but didn't know just how good it was, because like the fact that more and more Tempt is just better. There's no cap to it is kind of crazy. We haven't really seen too many mechanics, I think, like that before, other than maybe like slivers, where it's like the more slivers you have are the better, right? Eventually, it's sort of like, okay, like yes, it gets a little better, but not much. And here that certainly was not the case. So over and just some combat tricks in general that maybe I underrated, like Dreadful of the Storm, Shell
I
of
find
Zambush.
in the light of what you were telling, I find it particularly funny that you have also the Black Breath as an undervalued card, because you underestimated the 1/1s, and because of that, you also underestimated that Black Breath is going to be a perfectly playable card.
Mm-hmm.
And I still don't understand why Morgul Knife Wound is good, but okay.
And Breaking of the Fellowship, right? Like that card, actually,
Yeah.
I was happy to play it by the end of the format, and it looked almost unplayable to me at the time.
And it's both tempt and dealing with the one.
It was probably like a C-, and I gave it a D-, I think.
Yeah, probably that's something like that. I don't remember by heart now. Well, definitely you have also both of the A pluses, but that's an excusable miss because that's such a razor thin edge between A's and A pluses in terms of card power that you never can guess those. Maybe. Right. Let's move to mine. A much more comprehensive list of half of the set probably. My biggest miss was March from the Black Gate. I gave this card like D plus maybe, and it ended up being a B or something like that. So it was like close to making a 7 miss. I thought that this card can never work, and it turned out that it worked. Part of it is, I think, driven by the first couple of weeks when the archetype was much more open. I think that the card was lost a lot of its power in the later format because you couldn't get the cards to restart it so easy. But still, numbers stay. Big miss on Deceive the Messenger. That card was excellent, and I played a lot of it, and I learned my ways very quickly with it. A big miss on the One Ring, but there it's because I gave it basically an F, and it wasn't an F. It was like a C minus, which is, it's good. You draw so many cards that maybe you'll find a way of winning. Also, Torment of Gollum is one of my biggest misses, but by 4 picks. Horn of Gondor, Black Breath, Morgul Knife Wound. Here we have quite a good agreement between ourselves. This is the one that hurts. Pelagear Survivor. I missed it by 4 grades. And it's one of my favorites of the format, so sad moment. Scroll of Isildur, that's also like, this card was, if I remember correctly, it was a B plus. I can actually quickly check in the, I have the access to the grades.
While you're looking that up, I find it kind of interesting if I'm looking at patterns and things that you're underrating. On one hand, you have cards that pay you off immediately as being underrated. Things like Uruk-hai Berserker, Eomer the Rittermark. So like when the rate is high enough, and the immediacy of it. But if we think like, well, is that really that good? But then it turns out to be that good. It's easy to underrate it because you just didn't quite realize just like how impactful the cards were, because you probably still gave them good grades, but just you missed on them. But then on the other hand, you underrated relatively to their actual rating, like some super clunksters, right? Like the Bath Song, Arwen's Gift. So it's like you have the two extremes, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, Scroll of Isildur, by the way, a B, a solid B, and I gave it, I think, a C minus or something. Underrated Saruman's Trickery. This one, an A minus level card, so I gave,
so you gave it a B minus. That's not a huge miss. No,
it's not like a terrible miss. It's just like it was so much better than we thought. Also, by part driven by the fact that even if black-red was challenged, especially towards the end of the format, I think blue was still relatively open in most drafts if you wanted to abuse that. Eomer of Rittermark, which is funny because I gave it a higher grade than you did. And we had a long discussion about how this card might be busted, but we still both missed by like a whole letter grade. Breaking of the Fellowship, we both had it. Orcish Medicine, I thought that this card would be clunky. It turned out to be much better because driven by the black's general power. Bath Song, I'm still not my. I can't play with cards like that. It's too much choice. Just give me simple cards, simple, or at least a linear goal, and not like those dirtling choices from mid 2000s kind of strategy. Too much nickel and diming with those Bath Songs. Uruk-hai Berserker, Rohirrim Lancer. So that's clearly the part where I underestimated how good Tempt is going to be. Arwen's Gift and Goldberry River Daughter. Strange that I underestimated Doors of Durin. I thought that, if anything, that's the kind of the card that we should be overrating.
Yeah. I don't know. That card ended up being a lot better than it looked, but it was red and green, so still not very good.
It was though splashable with the Great Hall, so
decent, yeah.
So that was definitely a knock in his favor.
I one time splashed it, again, one of my few green decks, off the little Legend Elf or whatever that thing was, Delighted Halfling, because it taps for legendary colors. So
nice. It's not a creature even.
Yeah, it was pretty sweet.
I think I never drafted the halfling, unfortunately.
It's probably one of the few reasons to be in green.
Oh, I have to show you my green decks. You will learn things.
Oh, okay.
You just need all the hobbits for 2 mana, and you're good.
Well, here's the thing. So, I mean, a brief aside, but I think it's important to do the takeaways because, all the data, but what's the story around it? I feel like the story of this set was that it was a red-black set when we went in, and pretty quickly it looked like green was pretty bad, but then almost maybe unplayable. But then the narrative sort of became, well, green will be fine as long as X, Y, and Z. But I think that it ended up being that people ended up overdrafting green because people then suddenly started to think it was playable, which made it actually unplayable even more. So it's like there was a very, very brief of time period where maybe it was like 2 or 3 weeks into the format where I drafted a bit of green because I think people thought it was still pretty, like, really, really bad. So then maybe you could draft it. If you were the only green drafter or maybe one of two, maybe it was fine. But like if there was ever 3 drafters, like forget about it. And I think it sort of became accepted that it was maybe okay when it wasn't. And I think the card ratings show that. Like there was just so many D's and F's. And so I think it's just, you got to be a little bit cautious about the narratives around colors, especially just like from all the, content creators, everyone's saying like, well, maybe under these circumstances, and just really be critical of it, because it turned out this time it wasn't good.
That's absolutely right. But as a side note to this, I honestly think that green was
maybe misunderstood too.
No. I mean, literally, you needed those 2 mana green and white legends hobbits.
Oh yeah, I mean, Frodo was incredible.
But not only Frodo, Samwise, also like Mary, they were all good, especially if you have multiples of them. And like, I'm not talking about this green white Samwise who was just busted, but I mean, all the decks that I had with those colors that I had good success with was a bunch of like 2 of my trophy decks with green were the ones when I had literally Sam, Mary, Pippin, Frodo, and Rosie Cotton with the support of Bill or something like that. And the other one was I drafted a blue-black deck when I didn't have the Mouth of Sauron and I didn't have anything to kill with. So I basically splashed 5 Treefolk into that deck and as my top end and happy times.
And yeah, I guess that was kind of my point, is I think green was good when you got all the fellowship together, right?
Yeah.
But that only happened when it was completely open.
Oh yeah.
And then so if some people thought, oh, green's good because then I think it'll be open, and then 2 or 3 people thought that, then suddenly it wasn't. That was my point.
Totally agree with that. That's one side note, because we absolutely didn't talk about white because it didn't show up in our data, because we didn't overvalue it by a lot. We didn't undervalue it massively.
We did overvalue it by a lot.
Yeah, but not by a lot enough that
wasn't it almost 2, or was it only like 1 something?
Can you go back? But it was not to the extent that it would make the list of our super overvalued card, because that was occupied by the green. But my observation from the format, and like from the data perspective strictly, not necessarily backed by my personal experience, even though I did have trophy decks, is that the secret best archetype of this format was white-black, because all through the LTR, it was having one of the highest win rates, but never like always in like top 3, top 4 of the best archetypes, and close to the top. Never, approaching the win rate of the black red, but always decent, but never getting any traction in content creation. It was like always flying under the radar because there was nothing excited about it. It was just like a classic nickel and dime attrition archetype that had like a bunch of 1/1 flyers to finish the game.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever play it? Or
I think I played it maybe once. I drafted a lot of white red,
which was a trap in the end. No, I mean like late in the format most of the time.
Yeah, I mean I didn't draft it all the time, but I'm saying like when it was open for a seat and I got like all the uncommons and things, then it was actually pretty good. But I think the story behind white is actually interesting, because we can look at sort of that data where we overvalued by about 2 on average, and I think what really that's saying is that it wasn't a bad color, but it was a shallow color, because we probably gave some decent grades across the board, and some of them, like Protector of Gondor, like the Errand Rider of Gondor, like these clearly like good cards were actually good. But the problem was there was a bunch of things like the 1/3 halfling that could tap things down. Like that card just wasn't that good, and there was a long list of these white commons that just weren't that good, and we probably overrated white in general because of that. And so it tells the story of a color that ended up just being pretty shallow. So when you actually started drafting white, it was extremely risky because it was so easy to get cut out of that color. And so at that point, then that's why this became a Grixis format, because those were the only 3 colors where you could go into them and not necessarily just get cut out of it. And if you went for the strategy of maybe you're saying like black white, maybe you start in black, it's kind of cut. When you get into white at that point, it better be pretty open and the right cards better be there, because I think just as a color it was pretty shallow. There was like the 1/1 that tap to give your team +1/+1. There was just a bunch of cards you didn't usually want to play. Whatever by the ring.
I'm just looking at white while you're talking about it, and you overvalued every card in white except for 4. Oh no, sorry, 6. There are 4 that you got correct, and 2 that you undervalued, which is War of the Last Alliance and Stalwarts of Osgiliath, 2 tapped cards, and the rest of them overvalued, and very similar for me. I think I have.
And so I think if we extrapolate that, and if other people came to similar conclusions when they're first starting the set, if everyone's overvaluing it, then the good cards dry up really, really fast, which is why you wanted to avoid white for the most part. Which is why I think white red was often a trap, was because one
So
of the two colors was so overdrafted.
my hypothesis for why white red was a trap, especially later in the format, because early in the format it had a very high win rate, and later it quickly became. It's only because of the lower availability of Rally at the Hornburg. That card was just so pivotal for it because there was just not good enough 2-drops except for that. The rest of them were just very filler, replaceable. And in the beginning you can get 3-4 rallies. Any deck could be good with that. And as soon as you stop getting 3-4 rallies per deck, that win rate dropped off very quickly. Even if you got the uncommons and some removal or whatever.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting because that like when certain archetypes are so pivotal on like one or two cards, and then the card becomes reevaluated, and then the whole archetype changes. That's really interesting.
But yeah, again, I kind of pin it down. I probably would have to look at the copies of rally to win rate in red white per time and see if that's actually that's testable. I just never tested it. I just had this idea. You can't test every idea that you have.
I guess I think again, data and this review, it's like, how do we take this away and then look at it and use it for future sets? Because otherwise we're just sort of like being like, how did we do? And then it's not that useful. But I think the biggest takeaway is not actually the takeaway for green is fine, and I think it's just when a color is really bad, you avoid it. That's fine. But I think I went into the set and I drafted white quite a lot at the beginning, and it really tapered off. And like originally it was a Mardu format for me, and I had blue in 4th place, and blue like rose the ranks, and eventually I liked it as one of like maybe the top 2 colors. But I think it's when you realize that if you overvalue enough of a certain color and the color is worse than it is, then it can completely change how you're going to draft that format. Because I started off drafting white, and then I just started avoiding it later on. And so the sooner you can change
how faster
it, the better.
would you avoid white if you evaluated it correctly?
Yeah, I would just avoid it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so I probably would have had even better results if I had done that quicker.
It's like you often hear that people also, like, not even when they do review, but also you play the first draft, you trophy with it, and then you say, oh, this is busted, and you play like next 6 drafts and you lean to draft this thing, and then you just realize, wait, that first one was a fluke. Damn it.
Yep.
Okay. Any other thoughts about the evaluation of this set?
No, I'm ready to move on.
You're ready to move on.
Lord of the Rings was not my favorite. But it was okay.
Do you want to move on? We can do a draft, 17 land draft of Wilds of Eldraine as a warm up.
Go ahead, yeah.
Okay, but at first I'm gonna finish the podcast version of it. So with that, I would like to thank 17 Lands for, as always, providing the baseline for our set reviews, because how else would we get our grades if not for them? So thanks to them, and also Fake Jake Brown, and also to the wife of Fake Jake Brown, who I heard is always smiling when I thank Fake Jake Brown. I would like to thank the wife of Fake Jake Brown for keeping him in check. Excellent job. And while we are on the topic of the podcast, I would like to thank Asescu and Manajunkie for the intro and outro music, and of course to my patrons and mtgazone.com, and especially to Matthew, my new patron from this week. And with that, I'll hear you actually tomorrow, because tomorrow I'm doing the Draft Skeletons stream for the Wilds of Eldraine. So we finish with the re-review of LTR. I can move on to the Wilds of Eldraine content. So yeah, I hopefully see you similar time tomorrow when we look at how we would build the decks in Eldraine that I still have to construct.
And for Eldraine, I don't think we mentioned it yet, but just we're the plan is we're gonna evaluate all the cards, but there's so many set reviews coming out that we're not gonna stream a set review. We're gonna evaluate them right now, basically, and then that way we can still do these re-reviews, but we won't have to do the 8 hours or whatever it is of actually sitting down to record the review, because there's a lot of those out there. So that's our plan for this next set, and we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, that's definitely the plan. It's going to save us a lot of work, and we're going to in the end, I thought that those re-reviews are actually more interesting than the actual review itself, because we want to learn how to evaluate cards better and not speculate wildly about the format that we cannot know what it's going to be. All right, but with that, see you next time.